Hi, hello, my name is Kristin. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. This is just an informative webinar. It's not supposed to be therapy, but it's kind of meant to tag along with the past two webinars that I've been doing. I've been talking about shame, how shame might show up in our life, giving us kind of clues and ways to figure out what our personal shame voices are, what's going on inside of us, and kind of some ways to unravel what is shame, what's embarrassment, what's fear, what's anger, when we're faced with really intense emotions in times of crisis. So today, the topic that I'm going to speak about is an emotion or a feeling that goes very strongly with the concept of shame. So you can't speak about one without talking about the other, which is vulnerability. So understanding what this concept of vulnerability is, what it is, why it's a significant part of our healing, our relationships, our recovery, how to make it through crisis, how to feel safe in this world. You can't talk about how we struggle with shame without speaking about vulnerability. So I mentioned that the basic reason for shame, just a really quick review on the past two webinars, is that as long as we humans have a constant drive, a constant neurobiological wiring inside of us to connect with others, as long as that is present. So there's only like a small percentage of people that might fall under the categories of like a sociopath who just kind of feels nothing, feels no regret, feels no joy, feels no anger, feels no hurt, feels no fear. They kind of don't have that wiring, but that's a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of the world. So anyone else has neurobiological wiring that's basically sends out a bunch of feel-good hormones and chemicals that say, yes, connect. When you have that deep talk, when you're kissing, hugging, having sex, when you're holding the baby, when you're experiencing joyful moments. And then conversely, we have lots of really yucky feelings, uncomfortable feelings that happen when we feel like we've fallen short, when someone has disappointed us, when we've lost a loved one, either literally due to death or because we've been broken up with, when we feel like we're unworthy because we've failed at something or fallen short. Those are lots of chemicals that are basically saying, yeah, keep others in your life. And then you gross when you don't feel good enough for that to happen, it feels really bad. So wherever there's a strong presence and a desire to connect with others, there's obviously going to be kind of a yin and yang effect to it, where we're going to be in a great level of fear, worrying that we're not going to be in connection with other people. And there's been a couple people, Brene Brown, Dan Siegel, are people who talk about these ideas of why we have shame in our life. But there's just this general theory that our brains, as the uncertain world, as we see so many things around us happen, our families come and go, choices and things happen in this world, and we're trying to make sense of our existence amongst all this environmental stuff, is our brain likes writing a story in our head. So let's say I got in trouble in school, and it felt really yucky that the teacher got upset at me and mad at me as a child, and then mom and dad got really upset at me and mad at as a child. And so I really want to make sure that I don't disappoint and upset people again. So I'll quickly try to get out of that uncomfortable emotion by writing a story in my head. So even if it's one that is kind of continues a concept of insanity, like, oh, if I was just a better human being, or if I was a better student, or if I was funnier, or if I ran faster, then the teacher would like me, then my parents would like me. And your body rewards it by going, aha, yeah, that's it. So we kind of start this vicious cycle as a child, as these things happen in the world to us and around us, and our quick kind of gut reaction is to write a story about how we need to be better, how we need to do better, or how we're wrong and how we fall short. So I call those the shame voices. And that's what really drives a lot of what we do and don't do in life when we're in connection and when we're moving through this world. So of course, what we're trying to do is we want to connect. We're neurobiologically driven to connect, but those shame voices are constantly kind of tapping at us, tapping at our brain in the process. So what is the common casualty of these shame voices? It's this concept of vulnerability. So vulnerability is, Brene Brown defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. So the vulnerability is, I always just kind of think of raw. I think vulnerability is, I'm going out there, as a human being, I only have control of this, and quite honestly, not that much control of that. And I'm going out there and I'm kind of exposed to the whims of the world, of what other people are going to do, how they're going to respond to me. When there's national events or international events, those things might affect me. I mean, obviously, I live in the city of Thousand Oaks, where there was recently mass shootings and mass fires. So we got a really big dose of exposure to vulnerability, that we can be the best people in the world, or we can try our hardest, control all the pieces of life, and life still happens around us. And because our brains like to write that shame story of, you know, maybe if you were more religious or a better human being, that these things wouldn't happen to you, or better yet, it feels good maybe to blame other people if our society wasn't so screwed up, and judge and stuff, that maybe these horrible things wouldn't have happened. That we don't often deal with the main issue, which is when the environment strikes, you know, when bad things happen, the first thing we want to do is take vulnerability off the table. We want to wipe it clean, say, this is too tough. I don't want to expose myself to this risk and uncertainty and exposure. So, you know what, I'm just going to kind of fall back to feeling like I can have some sense of control in this world, and fall back to kind of what I describe as is these talents and traits that we kind of already know work for us. So I shield myself from vulnerability, and I armor up against the shame, by kind of, the term I like that I've adopted recently is over-identifying with these traits and talents that I have. So maybe I write these stories in my head that as long as I'm a great parent, bad stuff's not going to happen to me. As long as maybe I'm attractive or I'm successful and I achieve, or maybe I can't handle the exposure of being out and exposed to the whims of other people and how they respond to me. But I know when I drink, or I use substances, that kind of helps diminish that fear and exposure, to the vulnerability. So we kind of use these things around us to kind of help mitigate, or what we think in our mind is controlling, manipulating, mitigating the risks around us. But really, as Brene Brown kind of always says, is when you try to wipe away one feeling, when you try to wipe away one feeling, one dynamic, like a fear of exposure, then you can't just kind of put an emotion filter on. You actually experience, you numb and you push away all facets, all experiences, right? So if I'm afraid of being rejected by loved ones, and I try to kind of put on my best, I try to achieve, I try to be a yes person, I try to do everything that in my mind says I'm mitigating and controlling risk by being all these things. Then I also, let's say if I do get love and approval and acceptance from them, the voices in my head go, Kristin, they don't really love you. They love you because you're attractive, or because you do for them, or because you're the responsible, consistent one. Not because they see you're good, you're bad, you're light, you're dark, and they still accept you in spite of that. This world sees one facet of you, and that's what they like about you. So then you can see where that creates this cycle of, wow, once I've gotten acceptance from me showing those talents and traits and other kind of manipulative skills that I use to kind of shield myself from the vulnerability, then I get stuck on that hamster wheel where I don't want to experience rejection anymore. I'm scared as heck of that. I'm fearful of it. I still have those shame voices going on in my head. And I just still kind of over identify and try to put forth what I think everyone wants to see from me in order to stay, in this cycle of not experiencing rejection, hurt, pain, and all those uncomfortable feelings. So let's talk a little bit about vulnerability so we can kind of understand, because what's important, a lot of the clients that are, or a lot of the viewers who are watching these videos are in really painful phases of their relationships, maybe just family of origin issues or relationships. So the last thing in the world they want to do is start being vulnerable because they've been victimized, they've been hurt, they've probably often gotten the message that, you show me all of you and I don't want that. So me trying to convince these viewers that vulnerability is really important and it has to be an important process in your recovery is a difficult argument, but I'm going to try to make it nonetheless. Brene Brown starts with two paradoxes of vulnerability that I think I'd like everyone here to kind of be listening and pondering, maybe write them down and process them with your therapist or elsewhere. But there's two paradoxes of this concept of vulnerability. And again, vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, which is vulnerability looks like courage in you, but feels like weakness in me. So if I watch someone go up there, let's say there's a talent show, and I watch those people go up there and do stand-up comedy or play their instrument or sing that song, more often than not, you're watching them going, wow, that takes some guts to watch you go up there and expose yourself and kind of do what you love and are so passionate about. But then when it comes to me, it's like, oh, heck no, I'm not going to go up there and sing, because what if they don't like my voice? What if they make fun of me? I don't, you don't go up there and go, I'm going to go up there and sing because I love singing and I'm passionate about it. You go, oh God, I can't handle if they criticize me. So that's one paradox that she points out that I think is interesting about kind of our cultural concepts of vulnerability. The second is that vulnerability is often the first thing I look for when I meet you, but the last thing I ever want to show. So meaning I'd love for all of you to go out and kind of pay attention to who you connect with, who you like. When a barista's brewing your coffee, to when a waiter or waitress helps you, to colleagues that you have at work. When you think about, hey, I really like that person, there's just a really good vibe I have about that person, I'd like you to explore why. More often than not, it's because there is a level of humanity and realness to them. You don't get, in fact, you hear so often, oh my gosh, that person seems so fake. They always are talking about how perfect their family is, but we all know families aren't perfect and everything's not roses and cherries. And there's a little bit of unsafety that you experience when you kind of don't feel like you're seeing all of somebody, the good, the bad, the light, dark. Yet, that's the last thing you want to show to somebody when you're meeting someone or when you're in connection with someone. So those are just two interesting paradoxes. The other things that I'd like you to continue to explore is for you to just kind of sit down and express, what is vulnerability to you? How do you define it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? When you grew up, what were the messages that you got around vulnerability? Who did you see in your life be vulnerable? And what was everyone's reactions to it? That's a really, really great one for you to be processing. If there was messages where you saw there's a lot of gender, kind of gender stereotypes around vulnerability, about, when you're in pain, how you should react to it. When you have an emotion, what that emotion is allowed to look like. Maybe let's just stereotype a little bit further. Maybe women are allowed to cry, but not too much, because then they're going to be overly emotional. Men, when they're in a tough spot, are allowed to get angry, but not really express the hurt and loss and fear that might be underneath that anger. So it's really important for you to kind of explore what your messages of vulnerability was as a young person. How do you deal with the exposure of what life brings you? How do you deal with the uncertainty of life? For those of you who have any kind of like religion, what kind of concepts were around being vulnerable to the uncertainty of life, and how religion was supposed to play into that spirituality, and the cultural messages and expectations of vulnerability. The last thing I'm going to close with is just kind of talk about the 6 myths of what vulnerability people think when they hear about this, right? So again, those who are chiming in are in probably deep levels of hurt and pain, going, how do I get out of these levels of deep hurt and pain? And then here I am just saying, oh, be real, have vulnerability. I will say, let me start before I go into the myths. Do not be vulnerable without vetting and finding groups of people. You should only fully show yourself and be seen by people who deserve to see you and know you. So those are people who often respect your boundaries. So maybe you can talk deeply, and then if they want to know more, you say, you know, I'm feeling overwhelmed by that conversation. I don't really want to talk about that. Or I'm happy to talk about my kids, but I don't want to talk about my husband. And they respect that boundary. They don't kind of push and prod for more. There's reliability. So they kind of show up and just as often as you do. Accountability. You don't hear every story is how I'm the victim, how bad things happen to me, how there's nothing I can really do about it because everything's external happening to me, at me, because of me. There's accountability of, wow, this really sucked. I wish it didn't happen. This is the part I can be better at. I'd like to do this better in life. And maybe I fall short in this, but man, this wasn't okay that this happened. That there's, she uses the word vault, which is basically saying that when you tell somebody something and you say it in confidence, that there is this trust that it's not going to be used against you or exploitive or anything like that. No judgment. And she uses this concept of generosity, which is interesting, that you extend the most generous interpretation possible to the intentions, words, and actions of others. The word doesn't do that justice, but she's saying that basically you want to watch for people's understanding of others. Brene Brown has really helped me stop and think, what if you really believe that everybody out there, even the person that's victimized you, and this is not an excuse, it's just something to sit and think about, what if they really are doing the best they can with whatever skills and coping skills and managing their uncomfortable feelings and their trauma? What if they're just doing their best? Her concepts of generosity really get my wheels turning, especially as a therapist, about what if this person, you know, didn't just wake up with the plan to victimize their loved ones or to do drugs despite, you know, their own personal demise or the harm it is to others. What if they're just really doing their best? And she really encourages people to look at themselves and look at others about their ability to kind of be generous about points of view, interpretations of people's motivations and intentions. It's really interesting. So here's the 6 myths of vulnerability. That vulnerability is weakness. That's the most common thing that we hear. But however, as you know, if you've ever stood up on that stage and performed, or if you ever wrote that letter about how much you really love someone, or made that difficult phone call, or showed up to that funeral, you know that that is not weakness. That, you know, anyone who's in pain and who's still showing up, that is the greatest measurement of courage, for sure. There's this idea, myth, that you can opt out of vulnerability, but we do not live in a video game. We are in a world where there is hurt and pain and flaws in every single person and in this world. So this idea that I can control and manipulate and engineer my life to not be vulnerable or exposed to risk anymore is just not possible. So all those efforts, all that running on the hamster wheel are just lost energy. So that vulnerability is oversharing. So this is the part I really want people to hear. Vulnerability doesn't mean that you are a couple visits into a new mom or a new family member or a new friend, and you're just talking about your marital issues and the drama and how, you know, your partner's done you wrong and how your sex life is waned. Vulnerability does not mean I show up and tell everybody everything and I have no boundaries. The boundaries are absolutely necessary. You have to vet what is appropriate. You have to vet who is appropriate. And vulnerability does not mean just show up and release it all. There's also a myth that you can go it alone, that you can just program yourself to not have neurobiological drives. What you're kind of asking there, in my opinion, is that you want to be a sociopath. And I think our society has a pretty negative concept of, you know, sociopathology, which is, oh, those are people who can't feel, they're dangerous because they can't feel, where you can't feel empathy or remorse or fear. That's kind of scary. So I'm guessing you actually really don't want to feel that, because you wouldn't feel fear or pain, but you also wouldn't feel joy. So it's an exchange. There's this idea that you can engineer the uncertainty and discomfort out of vulnerability. We kind of talked about that already. And there's this myth that trust comes before vulnerability. And she's saying that we need to trust to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable in order to build trust. Trust and vulnerability grow together, and to betray one is to destroy both. So yeah, there's not going to be, there's this question of what comes first. Trust that someone's not going to exploit you and harm you before you allow yourself to be vulnerable, or how do you build trust without being vulnerable? You know, the answer is that the two tend to go hand in hand. They can never be mutually exclusive. And hopefully you have therapists and helping professionals that if you are listening to this and you're in a deep level of betrayal and you're thinking, oh, there's no way in heck that I am going to ever be vulnerable to this person again. The answer is often that it takes time. It's little baby steps of being vulnerable in this moment and having someone respond and validate it, and you feel a little bit safer in that moment. Then you try another baby step of being vulnerable, you know, saying, look, I was really mad when you did this and I didn't really like it. Or someone asking for a need to be met, and you say, you know, I hear you and I can understand why you want that need to be met, but I am just not in a place where I'm there yet, and I don't think I can. So those kind of back and forth are what really rebuild trust and allow an environment where you can feel more vulnerable. So let me just make sure there's not anything else that I want to say. And again, let me just finish here with the goal. The goals here, in order to have healthy relationships, is to be able to fully connect, even despite the risk, despite the exposure, that, you know, I can love someone, I can care about them, and they can sometimes not like me. They can get hit by a bus and leave this earth, but I'm going to kind of step up and love wholeheartedly anyway. That is an act of A, vulnerability, and then B, kind of rumbling with and finding a resilience to the shame voices that constantly want to blockade that process. And so that's why both of these subjects have to be talked about. They have to be identified. You have to have a language for it and understand it. Otherwise, these things just happen completely unconsciously. They happen at you, to you, and all you do is react to them. You act in a reactive state instead of like a contemplative, conscious state. And that's when the bad stuff happens. So that's why we have to just kind of bring a language to it in the first place, so you can start mapping this stuff out. And that's it.
A lot of great stuff. I was thinking, you know, the emotional shutdown. So, you know, we work with a lot of people who are struggling with addiction, and, you know, that numbing out and not wanting, I don't want to deal with the pain. and that they absolutely lose the joy in every other experience too. And I think for some people, it's the fear of the pain is so overwhelming that they're willing to put up those facades and really build in the barricades so that I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want to feel the pain. So I'm willing to make my life really small is how I feel, and be very rigid. And I've seen a lot of people that have done that. And I'm sure, the pain was so great. We talk about a lot of betrayed partners, it's very painful. So, so I can understand I'm just going to pull in and I'm not going to be willing to be vulnerable. I love that you're talking about, taking baby steps and finding people who are safe. And that's hard. But if I just put a little bit out there and I say something and Kristin, you meet me there and go, okay. And now I'm going to do a little bit more, and I think that is how we learn. And, we're all humans and we're all going to make mistakes, but being able to find a place to say, oh, I was hurt by this, or here's what I understood you to say. The other thing, I thought about too, I had an experience this weekend. I was talking to somebody and the whole perception, you started off, talking about, kids and how they go to that shame place, which I thought was really interesting. And, I don't know how we teach our kids differently. I don't know, but like you talk about divorce and kids automatically assume it's something they did, I think even when the parents are going, it's not you, it's just mommy and daddy or whatever, like kids still, my experience is that they tend to internalize that if I was just a better kid, then, this wouldn't happen. And I don't know, it's just fascinating to me and sad, that's where we automatically go to that shame and the story I'm telling. But I had an opportunity to talk to someone this weekend, and she was sharing about when she was a child and I was an adult, and she was talking about something, and I said, well, that's interesting that's what you remember. But I said, here, here's the history of all of this. So she had made up this whole story that was convoluted from the actual facts. But I was like so grateful that I had the opportunity to clarify things. She can accept or whatever, but I was like, here's what happened and here's the dates and whatever. So I had factual information, but I thought, well, now she can create a different story about what all that situation was. But I don't know that we always can find a place to do that, or that we get information that changes the story. I know we have the ability to do that, but I don't know that we always, go back and revisit the story and go, is that what really happened or whatever? So, really interesting stuff. I think, you're talking about, in your area, the double whammies of environmental things, and that does cause like almost societal trauma, and so how do we step out individually and as a group, and understand that the world isn't always going to be safe, but that we have resiliency. So David Fawcett did a webinar on resiliency, and my thought was always, you're born with it. Some people are resilient and some people aren't, and he shared that you learn resiliency and you practice it. And that was a whole different concept to me, because I always thought, you either have it or you don't, and you can get better at it. But to have this, idea that I'm willing to be vulnerable and I'm willing to have some resiliency, and, even if it hurts me, I'm going to get through this, and I'll, hopefully have some other safe people to do. I think you're, when you're talking about people that can be safe, the respecting boundaries, that's really hard. And particularly, with addicts who, have bad, addiction is a boundary violation, across the board. Right. So that's a really, challenging thing. And I know a lot of addicts, that want to overshare immediately, and then people are, put off by it, and they're kind of withdrawing, and then they're going, well, then there's no one safe, so right. to learn to do it in incremental steps is a process, and we're not going to do it right. I mean, that's what I keep thinking is we're not going to get it right all the time, and we just have to keep practicing, but being willing, that being willing to take that little bit of a risk, but the blessing to me of being vulnerable is the connection and the joy and all of that type of thing, that comes with it. And and you talked about, do you, is trust, is it trust, or does trust come before vulnerability? And how can you ever build trust if nobody's willing to be vulnerable? There's nothing to trust, it's just that brick wall. So really good topic, scary topic, because, we got to risk, we have to step over here. So.
As someone I was highly adaptive in being able to kind of, what I would thought was building up my life to try to mitigate risk. I really thought I hopped on that treadmill when I was really young, and I was going to
Sorry.
It's okay. I hopped on that treadmill really young, and I was going to outperform the world. I was going to out trophy the world. I was going to out A the world. So that I didn't have to feel like I wasn't enough, and that I was going to never have to feel rejected. Conversely, people avoid trying anything. There's the other side of that coin where people just go, what, if I don't really try, then I never have to deal with the struggle of not achieving, of not feeling that failure, or of feeling that failure. So I'm just not even going to be out there. And you can see, we don't just do that in achievement. We do that with relationships as well, and connection. And you can see where you're depriving yourself on both sides. So the one who never even tries, so never even exposes him or herself to the vulnerability of the relationship, never gets to experience that true connection. And then those who kind of use so much manipulation and, they like me as long as I fill in the blank, then even when they do finally feel that, get that connection, get that acceptance, it's still done with kind of giant holes in it, because there's always that voice in the back of your head that's like, what about when you do stop performing? What about when you do stop getting A's, or you're not so attractive anymore?
Or if they really knew who I was, they wouldn't like me because you're doing this whole facade,
Right, right. And that's obviously a major issue around addiction, right? Is when you run around and you have so many lies and double lives, you certainly, you get in that cycle where you never want to stop it, because you're certain that if they find out the lies you've told and the things that you've done, there's just no freaking way they're going to stick around. But I'll tell you, time after time after time again, and there's exceptions to this, your loved ones are more likely to leave you because of the lies that you continue to tell them versus things that you've done. And granted, there are always exceptions. Sometimes people feel too violated by the betrayal and the lying, and they just need to move on to a different life. But I've often seen, just freaking tell me the truth. Just show me who you are. I can deal with that. And it's also those who decide to get recovery and live that way never want to go back, because it's exhausting to put up those facades, to make up those stories, to lie to people's faces, to run on 6 different hamster wheels, depending on who you're in front of.
Yeah, I think that's so true, and particularly, I hear from betrayed partners all the time. I don't love the acting out behavior or whatever, but I just can't deal with the lies. So to your point, you're exactly right. It's like, I can't deal with that aspect and the gaslighting and everything else that goes with it. And recovery has given me the ability to live in truth and to continue to look at myself and look at the areas where I want to improve. Let's put it that way. So it isn't always that I have to look at it so harshly that I'm so flawed and so defective and everything, but, that I have places that I can strive to be better, which is a different perspective than, I have to be this illusion of a person, not even my real self.
Right. And I think when we talk about vulnerability, we also have to include that this is similar to recovery. just because you're not abusing substances or lying anymore, or you're living a more vulnerable, exposed, this is my good, bad, light, dark, I hope you can love me in spite of it, life, that does not equal rainbows and
Yeah.
roses
Yeah.
and balloons. Okay. It will equal that you'll feel all these emotions that you've been avoiding. So you will feel true connection and intimacy, but you'll also feel real rejection and real discomfort, because those were also things you were trying to protect yourself from and not fully experience. Because of course, when you're trying to be vulnerable, every day I show up and I make these videos, and while I get impassioned by sharing the subject matter, I love the positive connection with community members. I also get the, you don't know what you're talking about, you're worthless, you're a bad therapist. So you're exposed to both sides of the world. But would you take away the former for the latter, to protect yourself from the latter? And in my experience so far, the answer is no. I'd rather take the real versions of the really great stuff and the really bad stuff than nothing at all.
Yeah, I agree. And you talked about feeling the emotion and feeling the attachment, and as well as the negative. But both of those, if you're coming into feeling emotions, are terrifying. Feeling anything is terrifying when you've numbed out forever, and so, giving yourself space to be able to tolerate and just go, it's going to be okay. And it's kind of like, I'm going to be willing to be vulnerable with my emotions. I'm going to be willing to experience them, and explore where that goes. That for me was really challenging early in recovery, because I had so numbed out that, any emotion was unpleasant. It was foreign. But gosh, now, like you just said, I wouldn't trade any of that. I'll take the bad, because the good is so good. So
yeah.
Any comments or questions from the group on this or any other topic? It doesn't have to be just something.
It can be open-ended about what current phase you're at in recovery or treatment or whatever.
Yeah.
I can do my best.
Yeah. So while we've got a pause, there are other opportunities on sexandrelationshiphealing.com, which include drop-in groups. We have drop-in groups for female sex and love addicts. We've got for male partners. We've got for male addicts. We've got for betrayed partners, porn addicts. There's lots of resources there that are available. Then there are webinars. So Kristin's on once a month, but we have Dr. Rob does his live Q&A every Friday evening, and we have Dr. David Fawcett, who is doing his every Wednesday evening, all Pacific time. It's on the schedule. But then we've got a Spanish language one on Tuesday afternoons. We have Prodependence partner webinar on alternating Fridays. So there's a lot of information. I'm sure I'm forgetting something else. So there are other opportunities for you to connect. The Sex, Love, and Addiction podcast is in the top 10 for addiction podcasts. And it's been moving up, so I don't even know where it's at right now. It doesn't matter. But my point is that there's great information, on those. And Kristin, you've done one with Dr. Rob on his podcast series. And then Dr. David Fawcett is doing a new podcast series, Sex, Love, and Addiction, for, I won't get the title right, but Healing Conversations for Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Men. So, but he's doing it on sexual health and just a whole bunch of topics that are, you really can't find good information.
No.
There's a whole bunch of bad information on the internet, but to have really solid, he's got some profound experts on the various topics. So I invite you to check into those as well. So we want to continue to make it a place where you can find information and resources, in a safe environment. So you don't even have to be too vulnerable to have.
No, you don't. I think it's a great baby step, actually. I encourage all clients, if they can't get to like betrayed partners, and because think about betrayed partners, they are the most about as raw as they come, from levels of victimization, from those who they trusted the most have harmed them the most. Suddenly asking them to join a group and just go out there, share your story,
Yeah.
build new intimacy, that's so frightening to them. So I'm constantly grateful that
Yeah.
there's groups like this online that just started, like, it's kind of being able to dip the toe in it.
Well, if you've got little kids at home or whatever, you can put some headphones in and, and just listen to a podcast or whatever. I don't know, but I think with the betrayed partners too often when they share something, if it's a family or friend, they're going, just, leave your person, the automatic response is, we want to protect you, dump that person. And they're not understanding the history or like you recognize the reasons that why you love that person in the first place. So, there are, Dr. Rob's book, Codependence, talks about that, but it really is, an addict, I often call them broken. They've got, and it isn't just, super glue and they're fixed and it's all better. It's a process, but there is help and there is hope. And, if you're a partner and can see that, you see that good stuff yet, you still remember those things, then you want to support them in getting help. Some relationships are too far gone and can't be. And even those partners, I always encourage them to get to connect with a betrayed partner, because even if you leave the person, that doesn't mean you leave all the, the
Absolutely.
garbage emotion with them. So, try to.
Indeed.
Well, if we don't have any questions or comments, anything else from you, Kristin?
No.
Well, thank you so much. Always great information. I so appreciate your time and expertise. This was a very important topic, and hopefully everybody's willing to step out and be a little bit more vulnerable as a result.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And again, you can go ahead and email me if there's any follow-up questions. But
you share your email address?
Oh, yeah. It's Kristin Snowden, mft@gmail.com. And then I also have the website, Kristin Snowden, KRISTIN.com for more information.
Great. Well, thank you. And until next time, I'll look forward to the next topic.
All right. Thank you. Have a
Bye.
good day. Bye.